Welcome again to our another episode of the Real Estate Vibe Show. I'm your host, Vinky Lumba, and today I have a very special guest with me, Neal Bawa. Neal Bawa is a technologist who is universally known in the real estate circle as a mad scientist of multifamily. Neal, I would love to talk to you about that. What is that all about? And besides being one of the most in-demand speakers in commercial real estate, Neal is a data guru, a process freak, and an outsourcing expert. Welcome, Neal. I'm so excited to have you with me today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Binky. This is fun for me to do. So glad to be here. And the Mad Scientist of Multifamily thing just came from a conference. I was up on stage. I was presenting. It was a big conference in Denver. There were 500-600 people watching. And I came down from the stage, and there was a group of people that usually when you finish your presentation, there's a group of people that have more questions for you. So I was surrounded by this big group of people. And there was this one guy that basically, my presentation was about the use of science to create profits for real estate. And he was like, well, you're the mad scientist. And he was, kind of comparing me to Weird Al Yankovic, guy back in the 80s that used to have a weird hairdo and things like that. So he said, Neal, you're the mad scientist. And so I said, I didn't do anything about it, but he said that, and a bunch of people laughed. And then the following week, I had a podcast that I was doing with another person that was standing there, right? He was standing and listening to this. So in his podcast, he introduced me as the mad scientist of multifamily. And then a few weeks later, I go on another podcast, and they're like, this so-and-so guy mentioned that you're the mad scientist of multifamily. And then more people started mentioning it. And then at the next conference, they introduced me that way. So eventually it was like, well, people seem to like this concept because it helps them understand that my true passion is about, the use of numbers to create profit. And so I was like, well, if it helps people understand who I am and my personality, then it's not a bad thing to apply. So I adopted it myself.
Wow, I love it. Mad scientist. Great. So I'm going to ask you my favorite question today. How do you see yourself right now at present, personally and professionally?
I'm easily in the greatest place of my life, personally, health-wise, professionally, from a family perspective, because the last 5 or 10 years have been a journey of achievement, not necessarily monetary achievement. Certainly money has worked out well for me, but just achieving excellence in life, right? And money is obviously one facet of that, but it's not even the most important facet. So I have worked hard on improving my personal life, my health, my family life, my relationships with in-laws, my own mom. And so I feel like I'm in the best place in my life. I'm 5 years older than I was 5 years ago, so that can't be helped. And I'm a little bitchy about that from time to time. In general, I feel really great. I feel like mentally I'm in an incredible place.
Share with me your background a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like what made you who you are, or how did you start into real estate?
Well, I came from India, so that means that there must be some technology involved, right? So I'm a tech geek, nerd. I came to Silicon Valley. I still live in Silicon Valley. Came in 22 years ago. Started a tech career. Got hired by a tech company. That tech company then expanded. They moved me up to management. They liked my experiments. They liked the fact that I was unafraid of failure, and that's what I did. I ran a series of experiments there, and those experiments ended up in them growing 3 new businesses. And because they let me run experiments all the time, and they were okay with me failing at least 2/3 of the time on my experiments, I stayed there for a long time. So until 2013, when I started the company, I had about 10 people in the learning division that I was in. When I left, when we sold the company in 2013, so 14 years later, we had 400 employees. So it was a blast because I got to be an entrepreneur inside the company. And so I created a term. I said, I'm an intrapreneur, right? I'm an entrepreneur inside the company. So we created 4 companies, 3 succeeded, 1 failed, and had a blast. Really enjoyed it, had a great boss. He gave me a partnership in the business. So I ended up making millions of dollars when the company got sold. And he also not only allowed, but encouraged my real estate experiments, so much so that one of the earliest meetup groups for multifamily in the United States was created inside that business, inside its classrooms and meetup, inside its conference rooms in late 2010 or 2011. I don't quite remember the date, but it was early 2011. Meetup was becoming a big thing, and people had all kinds of real estate meetups, but they didn't have a multifamily meetup. They didn't have an apartment meetup. And so I was very passionate about the scale of apartments. And so I started doing that, and it sort of exploded from there. The first time I presented, 5 guys showed up. And I thought maybe, over a year, I can get to 10 or 15 people showing up. But I was in, Geek Town. I was in Silicon Valley. So, I mean, there's all these geeks running around, right? And so a year later, there were 100 people listening. And they seemed to like what I was doing with numbers, because my goal was, the problem with numbers is they're boring and they're hard. And so I became obsessed with the idea of making numbers easy to use to create profit. And so I would have other people look at what I was saying, and they would say, no, Neal, say it this way. It sounds better. It's easier to understand. So I spent a lot of time actually trying to demystify numbers and make them easy to use. And people like that. So eventually my audience started growing beyond the geeks and the nerds to other people that are not as geeky, not as nerdy, but they sort of liked what I was saying, and they enjoyed the benefits of it. And so now I'd say there's probably 20,000 people in the United States that follow me. There's about 8,000 taking a course that on real estate analytics that's on Udemy. I think there's 9,000 taking the course right now. And there's altogether about 20,000 people in our ecosystem that follow us and go to our webinars. And, and there's only about 700 that have invested with us so far. So I think we have 720 investors, which is a lot in the syndication industry. But I still feel like I could do a lot more. So that's the journey.
And you said you were unafraid of failures. How did you develop that mindset that you're like, I'm gonna embrace the failures, because the success is always the other side of the failure?
When I came to the US, I think I was 27 years old. I didn't have that skill. I was afraid of failure like everybody else, right? But I think that sometimes it's the environment. The CEO of the company that I was in was a Iranian guy, very educated, PhD, multiple masters from Caltech and Minnesota. It was just a very nurturing kind of person. And he realized that I had constant ideas, because I'd just walk into his office with 10 new ideas and I'd talk through them. And usually he would sort through them and point out some of the obvious flaws in my thinking. And then every once in a while, there'd be a good idea. So we would, schedule a meeting to kind of sit down and hash through it. And then he also realized that I was a strong implementer. And so I think it was the fact that I was in a good environment that helped me. He was not unafraid of failure himself. It's interestingly enough, he was very phobic about failing. But for some reason, he didn't have the same phobia when I failed. And I never figured that out. He's still one of my best friends. He's retired, lives in a mansion on a hill at the top of Fremont, California, overlooks the Tesla factory. He's got a beautiful palace that he bought with all the money that we made. But it's weird. He still wants to do lots of things because he's afraid of failure, but doesn't mind me doing them. And I never figured that out. Just a quirk of personality.
It's the company, right? You kept. And also you said you used to get multiple ideas all the time. And now too, you get multiple ideas. So it means you have, or your brain is wired in a certain way that you are away from that daily kind of rat that people are caught up in that. And they have never time to sit down to kind of, connect with themselves and see what kind of ideas they have or how they can make things happen in your life. So
I think that's really important. I can tell you this, and this is very counterintuitive, right? So I got more and more successful the less and less I worked, right? So what I found was that early on in my real estate career and early on in my technology career, I was obsessed with the idea of working hard. So I would work, 70, 80-hour weeks, and I'd be just crazy number of hours. And I produced a lot of output. But sometimes that output was high productivity and sometimes it wasn't. But even when it was high productivity, it wasn't necessarily high results. It simply meant that I was productive, right? And so as I grew older, I realized that that was actually not the path. So I made conscious attempts to reduce the amount of work that I was doing. So I could sometimes just sit there and think about a problem that I had for an hour or 2 hours. So right now I don't work Fridays. So on Fridays, I basically sit and think about problems and challenges. So throughout the week, as I have problems and challenges and I don't have time to address them, I create a meeting request for myself on my calendar on Fridays. And it goes from about 10 o'clock to about 3 o'clock. So about 5 hours on Fridays. And so then on Friday, I have nothing else to do, no meetings, nobody's calling me. They know that, if they call me, it's going to go to my voicemail. And I just think about and just stare at that calendar. And I never try to fix all of those problems from 10 to 3. Most of them get moved over from week to week to week. I just try and pick up one or two, and I try to really solve them. And so I find that that's very beneficial. I try and finish my workday at 4, because what I found is that this obsession with, somehow 80 hours a week is better than 60 hours and 60 hours a week is 40 is laughable, right? One of the best books in the world that you can read about when you're trying to grow as a person is Timothy Ferriss's 4-hour work week, right? Mm-hmm. Ferriss gets more done in 4 hours than most people get done in 60, right? And because he's not obsessed with the idea of working more, he's obsessed with the idea of getting more done, right? Mm-hmm. So when I realized that if I had to follow in Timothy Ferriss's path, I had to be obsessed. I had to become OCD, but I had to become OCD about getting more stuff done as opposed to doing more stuff. So I started making structural changes. The first structural change I made, I think, was in 2008 or 9 when I hired my first virtual assistant in the Philippines. And that's a long story, but an interesting one, how this person basically allowed me to buy 10 homes in the same 30 days and get them all rented out, right? So separate story, but I enjoyed that success of being able to do that while the world was falling apart and everybody was telling me I'm an idiot for buying 10 homes at a time when, home prices were going, down, 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 but they didn't realize my math was showing me that it was the best time of all time to buy real estate. And now, obviously, go back and look at that. Most people would consider 2009 to be the best time of all time to buy real estate. My math was showing me that clearly. My family was beating the crap out of me for buying real estate, but I was like, no, I know this is working, and the challenge is I can't find renters. So I used the Philippines team to do that, and then I kept growing that team, right? I kept growing that team, and then I realized I hit a roadblock, because once you grow the team to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, you actually start running into roadblocks, even though there's all these Filipinos running around and you're paying them $6-7 an hour. But the roadblock is that they're not senior enough to really read your mind. And so I started doing 2 things. One is I started getting into something known as business process automation, or BPA, right? Where I started to build applications in software such as Slack and software such as email and project management software such as Asana, allowing me to assign a task in less than 15 seconds. So my goal was, I need to create a system where I can assign a task to somebody in less than 15 seconds and put the onus of understanding the task on them instead of me. Because most people don't assign tasks because they're like, this takes forever, right? So I built different tiers of task assignment. There's a 15-second tier, there's a 1-minute tier, and a 3-minute tier. So I gave myself 3 different methods. And then I created business process automation around those tasks assigned, because assigning tasks, whether you're assigning them to people in the US or the Philippines, is something that most people can do, right? It's the follow-up and the accountability for those tasks that's the problem. Because I hear lots and lots of people experiment with virtual assistants, and almost universally their experience is poor, right? That's because they think that their job is to take tasks, assign it to people, and explain those tasks. Yeah, but that's only the beginning of your task. That's true. There's something that you have to do before you assign the first task, is to build an accountability structure for anyone that accepts a task from you. And so I built those structures. Mm-hmm. I also built mid-level managers in the Philippines that could read my mind, that could do things before I tell them to do it. Mm-hmm. And so then, of course, that allowed my business to grow. And eventually we went to the point where we stopped hiring people in the Philippines because we were making a lot of money and we could afford to hire people in the US. So, at one point, 85% of my company, my org chart was Filipino, and now it's down to about 55%. right? But it's unlikely to drop further because we find that when we have a mid-level manager in our company who comes in and with our accountability structures, the business process automation, when we assign an assistant to them, they're truly productive, right? So what we are often able to do, not always, but often able to do is we're able to take a $40, $50 an hour US employee, assign a $6 an hour Filipino, and get at least 50% more efficiency, right? So that's pretty awesome.
It is.
Because that last 50% is coming for $6 an hour.
That's
right?
So true.
And
yeah.
And some of those Filipinos, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 15, ends up becoming a manager.
Exactly.
And now we're paying them $8 an hour, but they're doing the same job as that $40 an hour person, right? Or $50 an hour. So it's a process. It's really, really tied to creation of accountability. And I know this is not a sexy topic, but that's why I'm known for what I'm known for, because I'm constantly running mad science experiments on what is the most useful accountability method. And I can give you some examples just so that it triggers in people's heads. But
before we continue, let me take 60 seconds to tell you about Multifamily University. Are you ready to take your real estate investing to the next level? Look no further than Multifamily University. Our comprehensive resources, including guest podcast appearances, educational webinars, the Real Estate Trends Toolkit, and the Location Magic course, are all designed to make smart investing easy and accessible. Plus, with no subscriptions, no upsells, you can trust that we're always looking out for your best interests. But don't take our word for it. Check out what our satisfied customer, Carlos M., had to say. Neal's presentation was filled with invaluable information that is not readily available to the average investor. This group takes you to the elite level of investing. Join the ranks of the elite with Multifamily University. Join us at multifamilyu.com and start investing from a place of knowledge today. Not only will you have access to a wealth of knowledge from industry experts, but you'll also be able to stay ahead of the game with our in-depth analysis of market trends and potential recessions or corrections. Invest with confidence and make informed decisions based on data, not gut feel. Don't miss out. Visit us at multifamilyu.com today or click the link in the description below. And now, back to the content.
That's a long answer to your question.
I think I love it. I love your process-oriented mind. But the thing is, the only person who can do it is if you have the clarity and the understanding of the task, like what the exact outcome you want, right? If you have the understanding, then you can hire the right people and employ them to do the right outcome. And if the clarity is not there, that's gonna kind of convolute things, right? So in your case, you had the clear direction, the total clarity, what you wanted to create for yourself. So that came from maybe from your technological background. You understand the processes working there and you brought that skill set into real estate.
I think parts of what you said I agree with, but other parts I don't agree with. You can't have clarity before you have clarity. Clarity is a chicken and egg situation.
That's true.
Almost everything I start with fog. And so what I do is I run an experiment of one way to clear the fog and it fails. And I run a second experiment to clear the fog and then a third, and eventually the fog clears, right? So I think you never start with clarity. In most things in life, you actually start with the fog. What I have is determination to clear the fog, despite the fact that my first or second attempt might fail. Now, over time, you get better at these things because if you're experimenting every day of your life, you're going to get better at experimenting, right? So I think I succeed more often now because I have years and years and years of experience at how to experiment. But I wouldn't say that I had the clarity. I would say that I had the determination to get to the clarity, task after task after task, because as soon as you get clear with one task, guess what? The fog's back on some other task. Everything in life is about you clear an obstacle and all that does is it gets you to the next obstacle.
That's true.
Right? So now there's fog again, and then you're like fighting that fog and getting to the next step, right? So I think those things are key. Like, for example, I built a beautiful structure that failed. Like when you listen to this, you'll immediately realize, okay, he built a beautiful structure and then he failed with it, right? So what we did was we took all of the key projects in our company. Let's say we have 5 key projects running in our company, right? And we named each one of those projects. And we put them in Asana, which is a project management software.
Right.
And then what we did was for each of those 5, we created email addresses in Google. We use Google for our email. And then we set it up so that when you send an email to that email address with let's say Vinky's name in the to field, right? The email address was for a particular project. Now, by sending that email, Asana would then create a task inside of that project and assign it to Vinky because she's in the to field, right? And you might think, wow, that's fantastic, because now all you have to do is you have something in your email and you know it's a task, and you can basically just click on Vinky and send it out to Vinky, and you don't have to worry about it, right? It's like, okay, it's already in Asana. Why do I even need to explain this task? If they have a question, they'll come back to me, right? Well, it was a great success for a little while. But then what happened is that people started to realize that I didn't have an accountability system for everything that they had in Asana, right? So what happened is early on, everyone was like, hey, it's a task from the CEO of the company. I've got to go do it. So it worked well for a while. But then over time, the tasks build up to dozens or hundreds of tasks. And so now people were basically like, well, nobody's looking at me. And so I'll do some and not do some. So we had, intermittent improvements. So then I realized that we have to find a different way of doing this. So what we did was we have a software called Slack. We hate email. We tell people email's bad. Don't use email. Inside the company, 99% of the time, sending an email is a bad idea unless it's something confidential. Use a Slack channel. So we have about 150 Slack channels for different parts of the company, different projects. Every apartment complex is a Slack channel. So people are in there. So we created a new Slack channel called Accountability. And we hired a manager in the Philippines, and part of our job was every day to look at these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tasks and create a beautiful graphic, easy to understand graphic of how many tasks did a person have and how many tasks were they past due on, right? And she posts this every morning, these two graphics. And we don't post comments on it. We don't beat anybody. We don't, sometimes we'll say, yay, good job to somebody who's doing a great job on them. But you know what that did? It was the other piece of the missing piece of the puzzle, because now there's managers assigning tasks directly through email at high speed, right? And now there's a manager checking to make sure that all of these tasks are being done and creating a visual system. And the visual part of it was most important, because if they'd created a table, it wouldn't have the effect. But the fact that it's a chart, a graph, showing the largest number of tasks past due, no one wants to be the top bar. Everyone wants to be the bottom bar. The least number of tasks assigned, the least number of tasks open, the least number of tasks past due. And so now everyone's in this mad race to finish their tasks as soon as they're assigned, because they know that the next morning they want to be last and not first in that graphic, without anyone ever talking to them. That's accountability.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what people need, especially who are I won't say the bottom level, at a level where the real action is happening, kind of, making your, connecting the art, making the deliverables. So earlier you said you made the numbers look easy to read or easy to understand for people. What exactly did you do with the numbers?
So in 2009, I bought these 10 homes in Madera, California, and they were very successful for me. Long story, so I won't get into it. Bottom line, I made a tremendous amount of money, millions of dollars, doing something that most people told me was idiotic, right? And using a virtual assistant in the Philippines to generate thousands of tenant leads to fill 10 properties and then buy them after they were filled, right? So that way I was making money from day one. So I did that. But the key part of it, Vinky, was not the person in the Philippines. The key part of it was also not the fact that I went against the norm and bought something in 2009, 10 of them. The key part was actually that I had picked the right city, okay? And the way I picked the right city was so ridiculously simple that now when I tell people, people are like, what's the big deal, right? It's like, well, remember, things evolve over 10 years, right? So I hired a Ukrainian hacker and asked him to spider the Zillow website for every city in the United States. And back then in 2009, Zillow actually on each page had the peak price for home prices in that city. And most of the times the peak was in 2006, right? And then of course they had the current price, which was the trough, because 2009 prices had fallen like crazy. So I became obsessed with this idea of what is the one city in the United States where prices have fallen the most? Because according to the rich dad, poor dad guy, when real estate prices go up, they go up too much and it always turns into a bubble. When they go down too much.
Mm-hmm.
They go down below replacement cost, meaning you can't even bill the price for the price that you're paying to buy them, right? So obviously at some point that'll correct and it'll come back up. So I was obsessed with what city in the US had fallen the most below replacement cost. So we spidered the Zillow website. We came up with the results, 400 plus cities in the US. And luckily I live in California, and the city that had fallen the most was Madera, California, 69% from 2006 to the end of 2000 or the beginning of 2009. And so I picked the right city. It was so far below replacement cost that when it came back up, I mean, the stuff that I bought for $90,000, I've refinanced them now at $350,000 each, right? So that's about roughly 4x increase in value over 12 years, right? So bottom line is, it was about the numbers. So the victory was not mine, it was the numbers. So I became obsessed with this idea of creating a toolkit to figure out the best cities in America at any given point of time, because I became convinced that there are no best cities in America. Most people who live in the San Francisco Bay Area think that it's the best. New Yorkers think that their city is the best, and Chicagoans think their city is the best. And I'm here to tell you that they're all wrong, guaranteed. They're absolutely wrong. Your local market is almost never the best market. There's some market in the US that is the best this year, and next year it'll be a different market, right? That's what numbers tell me. That's what data science tells me. So I became obsessed with this idea of creating a toolkit. And it took me several years because, I'm a technologist, so I complicate everything, right? And so eventually people told me this is too complicated. So then I became obsessed with a new idea, which is I have to figure out how good or bad a city is for real estate investment in 10 minutes, right? I'm not trying to be the most inclusive. I'm not trying to be the most thorough. I'm not trying to, hit the 99.9 percentile. I'm trying to hit like a 95% chance that this is the best city, right? And keep it simple. So I created that system and I called it location magic. And then I started teaching it in meetups in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then people started calling me at conferences. And the location magic system was really well received because there was no sell, there was no upgrade, no subscription. It was something free. It was meant to be given away to other geeks that have always are like, there's hundreds and hundreds of cities. And Vinky says, Austin's the best city. And Neal says, Idaho Falls the best city. How do I even tell if these cities are even any good? Right? So that's been a constant question. It's the most common question that real estate investors ask, right? Location magic is a very simple answer to that, because you never need to come to me. You never need to come to my website. You just need to get your hands on the location magic kit. And once in a year in January, when the numbers change for each year, we update the kit, right? And then you come to our website, grab it and go away, right? And then basically it allows you to find these cities. And things were going well. Hundreds of people were using the kit. But then what I realized is I wanted tens of thousands of people to use it. So I go and ask people around, how do I get like more visibility on this? And they're like, there's this website called Udemy. Why don't you go to udemy.com and publish your course there? And I'm like, should I charge for it? And they're like, no, just publish it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to publish this course. And now if you go to udemy.com/realfocus, REAL focus, you'll see the location magic system. You'll see 1,000 5-star reviews and about 10,000 people taking the course right now, right? So I don't know who these people are. Udemy doesn't even give me their email addresses. So I have absolutely no clue who they are, right? I get emails from somebody at least twice a week telling me they're using my system or they use my system and they made this much money in this city. And it's usually cities that, Vinky, I don't even know where they are, right? Like the US has 3,000 cities and towns, right? So how could I possibly know all of them? But it's nice to hear people using the system for so many years and benefiting from them. And it did financially work phenomenally for me, because roughly 1%, 2% of those people eventually said, this is too hard to do, even though it's 10 minutes. Because after 10 minutes, all I know is which is the best city to invest in. I still have to spend hundreds of hours to go do the investment. So 1% of those people ended up being my investors and allowed me to build, a portfolio. Right now, the portfolio is about 500 million. And we have 400 million that we're building, so that it'll become about 900 million by the end of this year. So that's all I wanted. All of it really came out of this thought of, let's create a simple system that people can understand that gives them something of value that we don't charge for ever.
Wow, I think that was really great move on your part. You were just not making a difference by giving something free, touching so many lives, but you created a branding for yourself too that way, because you were like, you're a brand in itself and people are reaching out to you. So now I would like you to look into your toolkit and tell me, what is the future like with this rising interest rates and inflation?
Well, it's good and bad. So on the one hand, we can look back at the 2015 to 2018 timeframe. The Federal Reserve hiked interest rates quarter point each 9 times in a little over 3 years. We saw zero impact on cap rates over those 9 hikes. We saw zero impact on interest rates, on home prices over those 9 hikes. They kept going up. Or maybe there was some impact, but it was minor. This one is a little different because in 2015 to 2018, the Fed had time on their side. It could hike very slowly. They were hiking like 2-3 times a year. Unfortunately, because in 2015 to 2018, there was really no inflation. Inflation in the US was actually under the 2% benchmark for the Fed. Right now, inflation is at 7.5% according to official statistics. It's probably at 14-15% according to the unofficial statistics. So the Fed has no time. So we believe the Fed will now hike at every meeting this year. There's 6 meetings left. So we have 6 hikes coming and possibly a 7th one next year. So that's very fast because the Fed has never really ever hiked 6 times in a single year, but due to the extraordinary nature of the inflation, they have no choice. What does that mean for multifamily investors? Well, on the good side, very high inflation leads to significant increases in rent. So you're going to benefit from that, though not necessarily now. On the bad side, it means that people that are interested in buying the properties that you're buying now, right, that you're selling now, are less likely to buy them at the highest possible price because their interest cost is going up. So there are 2 factors at play here. People are worried about the interest rates going up and going up very quickly because the Fed is very aggressively saying, look, we've not just got to raise, we've got to raise a lot. Raise 5, 6, 7 times. And even then we might not stop, right? Because they really need to get inflation control. 6-7% inflation is very dangerous. You can't have it in an economy for longer than a year. It will wreak havoc. So they have no choice. They're doing what is right for the country. Right. But sometimes that's not the same thing as being right for real estate people. So I think everyone should be cautious, but understand that there are 2 very powerful forces at play here. On the one side, there's, let's just call it 7 interest rate hikes. On the other side, there are 2 things and they're connected. One is there's the greatest amount of interest in multifamily as an asset class ever in history. Until 2012 or 13, office was the largest asset class in the world. Most people liked offices and didn't like multifamily because if you think about it, it's obvious why. You have corporate tenants that have hundreds of thousands or millions in the bank. One big building only has 3 or 4 tenants and they sign 5-year leases or 10-year leases, right? Why would anybody who likes office ever like multifamily, right? Because you have now hundreds of tenants and delinquencies, and there are people that you have in your property that only have $400 in the bank. Obviously, office is better until COVID. And then multifamily is better because office hasn't gotten slaughtered, but the vulnerabilities of office and its exposure to technology and remote work became very obvious to everybody.
That's true.
So in the last 2 years, I have seen a lot of office investors. They're not saying they're never going to do office. They still believe in the quality of that asset class, but they all want to diversify. There were lots of guys that basically had $100 million in office and nothing in multifamily. And they would say, I would never invest in multifamily. All of those guys now are buying tens of millions of dollars in multifamily. So there's this extraordinary one-time event where people from other asset classes, hotels, multifamily, retail, hotels, retail, and office are buying multifamily. So the demand is absolutely extraordinary, right? The second piece, again, connected to the first, also because of COVID, is liquidity. So the amount of liquidity injected into the US economy in the last 24 months is somewhere between 3 and 6 times the liquidity that was injected into the economy in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And we got 10 years of wonderful real estate profits out of that injection. This is 3 to 6x. It's actually 6x, but I say 3x because the Fed might pull some of that liquidity back, right? And it hasn't been pulled yet, by the way. The Fed is still, at this point, as I'm talking, in February 2022, still injecting liquidity into the market. And they will stop injecting liquidity in March and then, start tightening after that. So that liquidity is not debt-free. Money is created by loaning it into existence. And so all money that was created basically had some yield requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And that yield requirement is forcing people to make investments, is forcing them to basically put money in. And because of the extraordinary rent growth last year, multifamily had the highest rent growth, highest per unit prices, lowest cap rates in 2021 in history. So every record that existed for multifamily was broken in 2021, every record that I'm aware of. Because of that, a lot of that liquidity is going into multifamily. So we believe that if you get 6 hikes this year, by the end of this year, cap rates are not going to be higher than they are today. They're going to be flat, which means that prices will still be higher. Why? Because prices are based on 2 things: cap rate, which is stable, right? And rents, which are going up at a very high rate. So the price per unit at the end of this year, we project, is going to be significantly higher. Mm-hmm. The cap rate at the end of this year will probably be where it is today. Mm-hmm. And it might go down a little bit in the next 3 months as people rush to kind of buy things before interest rates go up, and then come back up as things adjust and interest rates get higher. It's hard to tell where multifamily will be next year. Mm-hmm. But for the year, my official take is that multifamily will do well because rents are increasing very fast.
Right.
And cap rates cannot decompress. They might actually compress a little bit in Q1 and compress a little bit in Q2 and then decompress in Q3 and Q4, which means by the end of the year, they should be where they are today.
Oh, so you think with this going rise in interest rate and then also the rise in inflation, wouldn't that at some point, it's going to be more supply than demand that might lead to kind of a recession kind of state?
Well, I think multifamily doesn't lead to recession. The real estate sector has only ever created one recession, and that was 2008 because, all kinds of bad things were done. Mm-hmm. But generally, real estate doesn't create a recession. It has to live in a recession created in the economy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The real risk here is that the Fed tightens so quickly that the US economy goes into a recession. In 2015 to 2018, they were very clever and did it very slowly because inflation was not affecting them. Mm-hmm. Today, they have no choice. Right. Inflation is so high that they will tighten very fast and very aggressively, right? Otherwise, they have even worse repercussions. So I think it's a 50-50 chance that they avoid a recession. So I think that there's certainly the possibility of a recession happening. If it does happen, though, please be aware that I think it'll happen next year because interest rate hikes do not immediately affect the US economy. It actually takes about 6 to 9 months for interest rate hikes to wind their way into the economy, right? Mm-hmm. So if they overhike, we'll have a recession next year, not this year.
Oh, I love talking to you, Neal. Oh my God, you have so much knowledge. We can keep on going, but I think we are out of time a little bit here. Might wanted to have you back someday. But I wanted to ask you one last question. Can you share one golden nugget with my audience?
I think the one that I like to share is that everyone's got a favorite book. Everyone thinks that there's a great book, right? I want to share a book with you that I don't think is the greatest book of all time, but I think it enables you to find the greatest book for you. And it's called The Miracle Morning. People who read this book, if they follow The Miracle Morning, they follow all the pieces, they're called savers in there. It will allow you to read enough books to find your favorite book. And that's the problem. Most of us, our favorite book is somebody else's favorite book because somebody told us about it and we bought their book and now it's gathering dirt on our shelves. The Miracle Morning is a plan for finding time to read all those books on your shelf. So read this book. Some of you, it won't change anything. And for others, it'll change your life.
That's true. You said it very well. I love it the way you put it. Just write your own story. Don't just take somebody else's story and make yours. So this brings us to our rapid fire round. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You have answered it in 1 word or 1 sentence only. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Who was the most influential person in your life?
Timothy Ferriss.
What is the best book you ever read or recommend? I think you already did.
Definitely Miracle Morning.
What is your biggest passion?
Balance.
I like that. I'm all about that too. I'm Libra. In 1 word, what does life mean to you?
Life means family.
Nice. What is your favorite food?
Favorite food, butter chicken.
Good one. And how can people reach out to you?
Just Google me. I am the only Neal Bawa on the web. Just remember, it's NEALBAWA. Hit enter. You'll see hundreds of podcasts and webinars and items, conferences. And that's the way to get started. If you'd like to, see our entire library, it's at multifamilyu.com. That's multifamily followed by the letter u.com.
Thank you, Neal.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.